Hi everyone, this is Nick, and today we're going to be taking a look at brewing and steaming on the ECM Classika PID. And if you've got a version of this machine at home with flow control, I'll be talking a bit about how we can use that to enhance the brewing process, how to set the stock flow rate, and what that means for your espresso. So let's take a look at brewing on the Classika PID. Before we get started with brewing, I do want to address a minor change that was made by ECM relatively recently. So for older Classika PIDs, the machines would ship with the standard plastic tamper and a straight handle commercial style dual spout portafilter. On current models, they are shipping with an angled dual spout portafilter and with a metal tamper. So this is bakelite, and then this is a stainless base. For the portafilters, there's really not going to be too much of a difference. The key advantage to having an angle is that you have a bit of ergonomics that help you with locking this into the groove. Some people also like to simply rest the spouts on the counter and tamp straight down. With something like a straight handle, you'll want to cover this part of the counter, maybe brace the portafilter against it and tamp. But otherwise, when it comes to your actual espresso brewing, there's not going to be really any serious impact between either of these styles of portafilters. And for the tampers, I'm still going to recommend some upgrades that you could get for both of these options. And with that out of the way, let's get brewing. Let's take a look at our options for tamping. Now, these are all tampers that you could have received from ECM or that you could buy, and I want to go over which ones to use and which ones I might suggest that you replace. So if you have an older Classika PID and you've got a more traditional plastic style tamper, this is something that you're going to want to upgrade right out of the box. Basically, while it is serviceable, you're going to have the most amount of play inside the portafilter. So that means we can really just kind of wiggle this around, and it's going to have a harder time compacting our puck the way we would want. So we'll put that one in the back row here. Now, the newer style, this is actually a stainless base with a bakelite handle. There's a bit of a taper upward until it gets kind of like a almost cylinder shape here, and then you've got a flat surface. It's fairly small, but it's not bad, and you can tamp in there fairly well. There's not a lot of play with this. And this would be a serviceable tamper if you wanted to go ahead and just tamp out of the box. You do have a couple of options for upgrading though. And the first is going to be ECM's own stainless steel base tamper. You can really see a difference, actually, I'll get these together, in the thickness of these bases. So that helps this one just tamp a little bit more evenly, and you've got a bit more weight and heft behind it. It's also a larger handle. And one of the things that it does really well, I think, is that there's a nice curve here for your thumb to wrap on for when you're pressing down. You do get a curve here, but it's just a little bit more of a sheer angle on this tamper, so it's not as comfortable. So I would say if you really wanted to go all in with the brand, one of ECM's own branded tampers is going to do a really nice job of just giving you a piece of comfortable and attractive equipment. So if you want to up your game even further, you can get a system for leveling and then also tamping your coffee. So this first tool, this is the ECM Coffee Distributor. This isn't a tamper, but it's got a blade on here, and what we can do with that is actually place it in the portafilter, and when you spin it like this, it's going to polish off the surface of your puck before you even tamp. That helps make sure that all the coffee is evenly distributed as a puck so that you can tamp with no unevenness. Now, the great thing about these too is that actually this blade is height adjustable. So let's say we had a single shot basket in there or a triple and we needed a different depth. We can actually grab the aluminum top here, and if you unscrew it, now the base can be raised or lowered depending on the depth that's required, and then we can lock that back in. And so then once we polish, we could tamp with a regular tamper, or you could get something like the ECM Push Tamp. Now, these are basically designed to look very similar to one another. They're a nice matched set. Same idea with this. Depending on the depth of your basket that you require, you can adjust. And the great thing about these, honestly, is not only is it nice and heavy, but when you've got your portafilter, there's the ridge along your basket here. And one of the problems you can have when you tamp is if you come in at an angle and you tamp down, you can create channeling by having your puck tamped unevenly. With something like the push tamp here, the ridge that you've got along the basically tamping surface here catches the sides of the basket. So you simply lower it down, and with a nice flat puck, you press, and you can't tamp really at an angle because eventually these edges are all going to come in contact with the side of that basket. So another accessory that you could use to help with the process of tamping is going to be the ECM tamping station. So you have a seal here on the bottom that keeps it nice and sturdy and prevents it from really coming in contact with the countertop, and then again another little gasket along the top to protect the sides of your portafilter. And so you simply put that in here with the neck, and then you tamp. So with an angled portafilter, it is going to be a little bit more balanced, but I always recommend, instead of trying to use these hands-free, simply hold and then tamp. And that's going to be especially true if you use a straight handle portafilter, which can tip back. So again, simply hold in and then tamp. And that covers the tamping solutions that we have available from ECM. So before we get started with actually brewing, I do want to address our flow control users that we have in the audience. The Classika PID has a stock flow rate of about 7 grams per second. So if you receive the machine without a flow control device, that's what you could expect from the pump to the group if you were to simply flip the brew lever. Now, this flow control device, though, does let you change the flow rate of water. But let's say that you just want to start with pulling standard shots without any variation. To achieve a 7 gram per second flow, and this is going to be approximate, all we need to do is from our starting position, which is the valve as fully closed, we'll turn 1 full revolution plus 1/4. So if we think of this as the position, say, on a clock face, we'll start at 3 o'clock here, 1 full revolution to 3, and then an additional quarter turn up to midnight. So Mark has done a video that talks about how you can map the position of the flow control knob to your flow rate so that you can more easily understand what I'm talking about. But just to give you a quick overview, we've got basically closed entirely, approximately 2.2 grams at 1/4. We've got 4.2 grams at 1/2. We've got 5.5 at 3/4. We've got 6.2 at 1 full revolution. And so you may see some literature that recommends a lighter flow rate. So if you wanted to try that, maybe a 6 gram per second flow rate would be somewhere to experiment with. As we said, 1 1/4 is going to get you about 7 grams per second. 1 1/2 is about 7.5 grams. 1 3/4 is roughly 8 grams per second. And then you really get a bit of a jump at the end, but if you go all the way to 2 full revolutions, that's going to get you about 10 grams per second of water. So before we brew on this, I'm going to go right ahead though and get myself back down to 1 1/4. And that's how you would use flow control and adjust it on the machine. So one other thing to note though too, is that if you have a scale at home and you can measure your water in grams, what you can do is actually use the scale and the result of a brew cycle in conjunction with the timer on your PID. So let's say, for instance, that you run your pump for 20 seconds. Well, then you would take the total amount of water dispensed and divide that by 20 to give yourself an idea of the water flow rate in grams per second. And in that way, you can also control the position of the valve with even greater precision. With our flow rate set appropriately and my demo on tampers done, let's go ahead and put that knowledge to good use and pull a shot. So this is a prosumer machine here, and our recommendation really is going to be that if you're going to buy a prosumer, you're going to invest in this level of coffee equipment, you need to get a suitable grinder as a companion. Otherwise, you're really going to be limited in terms of what this machine can produce, regardless of the different features that it has. A grinder like this one has what's called stepless adjustment, which is something that you really want to look for a prosumer, because that means you can really refine the grind so that your extractions are where you want them to be. There's also the ability to time your grind, which is just very helpful because you can set this time to correspond more or less to a specific weight target that you want for your ground coffee so that you can be consistent in the shots that you pull. And so we're going to aim for about 18 grams of dry coffee into this portafilter and then brew about 36 grams of liquid espresso out. That's what's referred to as a brew ratio, and AJ has done a really good job of basically covering what that means in a video that we can link up in the right-hand corner for you. So let's go ahead though and grind our coffee. And what we'll do now is get that polished and tamped, and we'll pull our shot. So I will float right across here for a moment and get that portafilter locked in. And this is a handy little accessory too. This is a measured glass. So as you can see, we've got measurements from 1/2 to 2.5 ounces. And if you don't have a scale like I'm using, you can aim for around 1.5 to 2 ounces of espresso in about 25 to 30 seconds. And I am giving you a range because one thing that you want to remember is that ultimately you're going to drink the espresso that you brew, and if it tastes good to you, that's going to trump a lot more of the other results, let's say, because ultimately it's your coffee to judge. So I'll tear out that scale and we'll flip the switch. My timer is going to start, and then just push that slightly back so I can see my scale. I'll move this slightly. I feel like I'm just almost in the danger zone there. So our time is about 38 seconds for 37 grams. Now, that's a bit on the long side, and what that means is that we would want to refine our grind to use a slightly coarser grind of coffee. Mark has done a video on what's called dialing in, which is the process of calibrating your grinder's fineness to get you the results that you want with your shot. Ultimately, as you experiment, you'll find that perhaps you prefer slightly longer pulls, and that may be better suited for specific roasts or origins. But that's how you would pull a shot using the ECM Classika PID. We have our shot, but I want to show you how we can make more than just espresso with something like the Classika PID. So this is a slightly longer pull, which means that it may be a little too bitter for an espresso, but we can actually save this with some hot water and make one of my favorite drinks, which is called an Americano. So I have a traditional 8-ounce coffee style glass here, and all we want to do is just take our shot, pour that in, and it's really good with these spouted shot glasses to do that, and we'll hit our pump switch, and we can open the hot water arm now, or steam on, depending on which mode you're using it in, and you can kind of actuate the pressure of this water coming out. You can get really intense, but I kind of like a more gentle stream when I'm making an Americano because that helps preserve some of that crema layer that we have on top. And so if you've got friends who are coffee drinkers but maybe not really into espresso, they'll probably be amazed by the depth of flavor and the nuance that something like a good full-bodied Americano can deliver versus the traditional drip that they're drinking at home. That hot water wand is great too for dispensing water, say for tea or cocoa. Maybe you've got a powdered mix for like a chai latte, but there's a lot of flexibility that you get with an espresso machine outside of simply making coffee. But in this case, that's how you'd make a Americano using the Classika PID. For our flow control users in the audience, let me show you another thing that we can do to further refine our preparation without having to, say, adjust our grind or our tamp. We can adjust the flow rate instead and use that for a long, gentle pre-infusion to help loosen up some of our coffee before hitting it with full extraction flow rate. So right now we're at that 7-gram rate. Let's go ahead and knock that down to about 2 grams. We'll see what a long pre-infusion will do to our overall shot time. Let's go ahead and get our portafilter here. Get that angled for me. And I will switch sides again. And now we'll simply run our pump for quite a while, for 7 seconds, to really kind of loosen things up and then increase the flow. And we'll see what that does to the total time for our extraction. And so now we're down to about 36 in about 36 seconds. So we've shaved off 2 seconds, even though we had a longer pre-infusion with a slow flow rate. And what you'll find is ultimately that can help loosen up the coffee before you actually start to extract. We're gently saturating all of the grinds in the basket, which can help reduce channeling because you can prevent dry spots by basically allowing water to just very gently introduce itself to the coffee first. That way, when the actual full flow rate is applied for our extraction, water can more easily flow down out of the portafilter and into the cup. We could also increase the flow rate during extraction, which would further speed up our flow and then ultimately reduce the time. But you want to be careful with playing too much with flow control because you need to remember to readjust the dial as you're brewing. So really, if you're simply doing that gentle pre-infusion followed by a more traditional extraction, you'll be setting yourself up for success. And this works really well for really fresh, really lightly roasted bright coffees to help reduce some of that acidity and ensure a nice, even extraction. Now that we've made our coffee drinks, I want to show you how we can make a milk drink too. So I'm going to go ahead and flip the steam switch to switch into steam mode, and we'll froth milk to make a latte. Now that we're at temperature, let's go ahead and start steaming. But first, a couple of little tips and some of my own feelings about this machine. First of all, if you want to get even greater steam pressure before you start frothing, you can just extract a little bit of water from the hot water wand, and that's simply by opening it up before you steam, because the latent pressure in the boiler is going to push that out, and then that's going to allow for more room in the boiler for that steam to expand. And you need to do that with the wand here, because what's going to happen is if you use the pump, say with the brew lever or the pump switch, it's going to be drawing in new water to replace it. So if you just open this up and bleed out a little bit of water, you can increase the steam pressure. But on the topic of steam pressure and on this machine in general, one of the things I love about the Classika PID is that it has a PID that controls both the brew temperature and the steam temperature. So that means that you can be very precise with the temperature of your extractions if you have different origins or roasts that you're playing with, but you can also set your steam temperature, which in turn is going to determine just that pressure that you use for frothing. So if you want a machine that has that kind of control, but you don't need the access to steam all the time, say like you would on a dual boiler, this machine is really one to consider. So I have some whole milk with me, and I've got a 12-ounce frothing pitcher. And you want a good sized pitcher for frothing. 12 ounces is probably my favorite just because of the size and shape of it. And this is going to give us, go with a hair more milk there. This is going to give us good control over frothing because we have a pitcher that will allow the milk to expand, but a shape that will allow it to start rolling and folding over itself in the pitcher, which is how we incorporate that air into the milk. So I will go ahead and open the valve now, because there's always some water that's condensed inside the line that we want to purge out before we begin frothing. And so with our pitcher, we want to get the steam tip positioned so that we're just kind of above the surface of the milk with an angle that's going to allow the milk to start a vortex that will start folding that air into it. And you'll hear a kind of a ripping sound that will let you know that you're adding air to the milk. So let's go ahead and start that. And I'm using whole milk here, which is what I recommend. The fat content allows you to froth it much more easily than, say, 2% or non-dairy milks. And right when that's getting just a little too hot to hold, I am going to cut the steam there, and I'll switch back into brew mode. You want to get a towel and have one handy just to wipe down that wand right away and do a purge to get any milk residue out of there. So we'll go ahead now and actually cool off the boiler and get it ready to brew. So I'm going to run the pump, open the valve, and that's going to be drawing in new water and replacing the steam with it. Being a little sneaky here, getting my shot prepped, but I'm going to get that tamped and we'll be right back. So I've prepped my shot off screen. We'll go ahead and lock that into the portafilter. And with our milk here, we're just going to want to keep on giving that some swirling to help keep it nice and creamy. We'll go ahead and pull our shot, and then we'll pour our milk. And that's looking good. Now, this is not going to be a latte art or pouring tutorial. AJ has covered that in a really good video that he did chronicling his process of learning how to pour a latte art heart. We'll link that for you up in the top right. So one thing that we do want to do though is we'll pour basically a base of milk that's going to lift our crema up, and then with the foamier part of the milk, pour a design into the crema. That's kind of latte art in a nutshell here. So I'll go ahead though and I'll start with my pour. I'll just kind of lift that crema up. And this may be a bit too foamy. Yeah, so there's a little too much air in this one. And what we would want to do then is really go back and inject less air, meaning that we just kind of incorporate it together after we've gotten enough foam. And so AJ, like I said, covers that very well in his video. But one of the other things that's really nice about the Classika PID is if you find that the pressure was just too much or too little, you can go ahead and just change that steam temperature for different results the next time. But that's how you'd froth milk using the ECM Classika PID. Whenever you've pulled a shot with this machine, you'll be left with a spent puck in the portafilter. So if you've noticed, I've got something here called a knock box, which is a handy accessory that you can use to knock out that spent coffee to make it easier on yourself for after brewing cleanup. Now, we'll simply go ahead and disengage the portafilter from the group, and because this machine has a solenoid valve that relieves excess water from here down into the drip tray, we have a fairly dry puck that will be easy for us to knock out. So this is a rubberized bar, and we simply strike the portafilter against that bar to knock the majority of our coffee out. And then you can take a towel and simply go ahead and brush out whatever's left in there. So nice and clean. And we can take a look too at our group on the screen, and I see that there is a little bit of coffee residue on there. First, I'll go ahead and run the pump, which should purge a lot of the loose grinds, and then I can take my brush and scrub off anything else that's still on there and around in the group. Give it one more flush, and then we're ready to brew again. So the knockbox is a great quality of life accessory because it keeps you from having to, say, knock your portafilter against the garbage, which always kind of skeeves me out. So this is a nice ECM branded one. We've got a couple from other manufacturers as well, but I definitely recommend that you always clean off your basket, your screen when you're done brewing a shot, and especially when you're done brewing for the rest of the day. This is going to be cooling down. It's still very hot. You can bake on some of that coffee onto the metal components, and then it becomes even harder to remove. But definitely do that, and consider getting yourself a knockbox as well.